Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Grace. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I came from a family that struggled, but stayed honest. That belief shattered the morning I learned my name was being used to raise money for a disabled child who didn't exist. A child the world thought I had abandoned. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just expose a lie, it triggered consequences my mother and sister never prepared for, consequences that would dismantle everything they built their lives around. If you've ever been quietly judged by the people closest to you, emotionally cornered into being the responsible one, or made to feel guilty for asking questions, take a second to like this video. Subscribe if stories about quiet strength, betrayal, and long-delayed truth resonate with you. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every one. Now let me take you back to where this story actually began. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter just as I finished pouring my morning coffee. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't stressed. It was an ordinary weekday, one of those calm mornings I'd worked hard to build for myself. The message was from Natalie Brooks, my college roommate from 10 years ago. We weren't close anymore. Life had pulled us in different directions the way it does. But the tone of her message made my stomach tighten before I even finished reading it. Charlotte, I just saw your charity page for your disabled daughter. I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me you had a child? For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. Disabled daughter? I stared at the screen, rereading the message slowly, carefully, as if a different meaning might reveal itself if I paid closer attention. I don't have children. I've never had children. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the tile. Coffee splashed across my ankles, hot enough to sting, but I barely felt it. My heart was already racing, my breath shallow, my hands trembling as Natalie's follow-up message appeared. A link. I didn't click it right away. Something instinctive, some quiet internal alarm, told me to pause, to brace. But curiosity, dread, and disbelief all won. The page loaded slowly, and there I was. My face stared back at me from the screen. My professional headshot, the same one I used on CareerNet. Neutral background, soft lighting. The version of myself I presented to the world when I wanted to look capable and trustworthy. Next to it, bold text, Charlotte Grace, proud mother of Isabella, age 5. Born with a congenital neuromuscular disorder. The room tilted. I scrolled, my chest tightening with every movement of my thumb. There were updates, dozens of them. Emotional but polished. Detailed but just vague enough to sound credible. Descriptions of neurological rehabilitation, adaptive mobility devices, specialist consultations, photos of hospital rooms, photos of me, or versions of me, digitally placed beside a small child. A child I didn't recognize. A child who, disturbingly, looked like Avery Collins, my sister's friend's daughter. I sank into a chair, my lungs refusing to fill properly. This isn't real, I thought. This is a mistake. Someone used the wrong photo. Then I saw the donation section. The bank account number stopped my breath completely. I knew that account. My mother, Evelyn Grace, opened it when I was in high school. She called it the Family Emergency Fund, the account she and my sister Lauren still used. The same one I'd been sending money to for years. My hands shook as memories rushed in. Small moments I'd never questioned. Lauren calling in tears about an urgent dental emergency. My mother explaining she hated to ask, but there was no one else. Transfers I made without hesitation, without receipts, without doubt. Just last month, I'd sent $780. Before that, $420. Earlier in the year, $910. I scrolled back through the charity updates. The dates lined up perfectly. Each time I'd sent money privately, a public appeal had appeared online, asking strangers to help save my child. The realization hit so hard I had to run to the sink. When I finally looked up again, my reflection barely felt like mine. Pale, hollow-eyed, A woman trying to understand how her own life had been quietly rewritten without her consent. I called Natalie back immediately. "When did you find this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "And did you donate?" She hesitated, then admitted she'd shared the page before something felt off. A mutual friend had donated. Others probably had too. While she talked, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Screenshots, URLs, donation histories, archived versions of the page. I forced myself to slow down, to be methodical. This wasn't just shock anymore. This was something else, something colder. "This is identity theft," Natalie said carefully. "Charlotte, this is serious." "But they're my family," I whispered automatically, even as the words felt thin. "Family doesn't invent a disabled child in your name," she replied. "You need to protect yourself." My phone buzzed again. Mom. Her smiling face filled the screen, the same weekly call she made every Tuesday without fail. The routine had always felt comforting. This time, it felt staged. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't answer. The silence afterward felt heavier than the betrayal itself. Later that afternoon, I sat in the break room at work, staring at nothing, when Erin Caldwell, a coworker I barely knew beyond polite greetings, sat across from me. "You look like something just collapsed," she said gently. I don't know why I told her. Maybe because I was exhausted from holding it alone. Maybe because her expression didn't soften into pity. "Someone created a charity page using my identity," I said, "claiming I have a disabled child." Her jaw tightened as she scrolled through the page. "This is deliberate," she said quietly, "and dangerous." "It's my mother and sister," I admitted. "That's their bank account." Instead of questioning me, Erin nodded. "I used to work in digital risk and forensics," she said. "If this is real, we need to preserve evidence. Now, before they panic." "You believe me?" I asked. She looked up. "Completely." Something shifted inside me then. For years, I'd been the reliable one, the fixer, the daughter who didn't ask too many questions. Now, for the first time, I understood something with terrifying clarity. I hadn't been chosen by accident. I'd been chosen because I was easy to trust and trained not to doubt. And the moment I stopped playing that role, everything was going to change. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my couch staring at the ceiling, replaying memories that had never felt suspicious until now. The pattern was suddenly everywhere. How I was always the calm one, the capable one, the person my mother leaned on when things fell apart. How questions were subtly discouraged. How urgency was always framed as love. By morning, shock had settled into something sharper. Erin arrived just after sunrise with a canvas laptop bag and a steadiness I immediately clung to. "First rule," she said, setting up at my kitchen table like she'd done this 100 times before. "We don't confront anyone, not yet. The moment they realize you know, they'll delete, rewrite, deny." I nodded, gripping my coffee mug, even though my hands were already warm. We worked in near silence at first. Erin pulled archived versions of the charity page, moving backward through time. Each click felt like peeling away a layer of deception. The earliest version appeared on her screen. My CareerNet headshot. A grainy photo of a newborn in an incubator. A caption beneath it. "Charlotte and Isabella. Day 1 of our journey." My chest tightened. "I've never been in a hospital nursery," I said quietly. "They've been running this for almost 3 years," Erin replied. "And it escalates gradually. That's intentional. It builds credibility." She scrolled through updates like chapters in a long, carefully written novel. Early posts were sparse, optimistic, then complications, setbacks, specialist referrals, equipment needs. The language walked a precise line, technical enough to sound real, vague enough to avoid verification. Then she opened a spreadsheet. "Let's line this up with your personal transfers." I watched numbers slide into place, dates stacking neatly beside one another. October, 2 years ago. My mother's voice on the phone, tight with worry. Utilities might be shut off. The spreadsheet highlighted a charity update from the same week. Emergency housing near treatment center. Goal, $9,800. Another row. Last spring. Lauren crying, saying she was about to be evicted. Urgent relocation for medical access. $11,200 raised. The pattern was flawless. They didn't see me as family, I said slowly. They saw me as insulation, cover, someone who would never question them publicly. Aaron nodded. You were the safest face they had. That realization hurt more than the fraud itself. By the afternoon, Aaron had mapped donor spikes against my bank history with surgical precision. Every private request aligned with a public plea. Every emotional call matched a carefully timed post. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. We need legal counsel, Aaron said. Someone who understands identity theft at scale. That was how Samuel Wright entered the picture. 2 days later, I sat across from him in his downtown Portland office. Folders spread between us like a quiet accusation. He reviewed the evidence without interruption, his expression growing more severe with every page. This is not impulsive, he said finally. Your mother has substantial gambling-related debt. Court filings show payday loans, liens, repayment defaults. I stared at him. She always criticized gambling. People hide what shames them, Samuel replied gently. Your sister's situation isn't better. Credit card debt, eviction filings, multiple income gaps. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They tried something similar with your cousin Daniel last year, he added, but he caught it early and threatened legal action. Another silence. Another quiet betrayal I hadn't known existed. That evening, my apartment stopped feeling like a home and started resembling a command center. Evidence boards lined the walls. Timelines stretched across the dining table. Aaron set up encrypted backups while Samuel organized documentation into legal categories. We need roles, Aaron said. Samuel handles legal. I handle technical tracing. Charlotte coordinates. Hearing my name like that, spoken with authority instead of expectation, felt strange. We document everything, I said. No confrontations, no warnings. We don't give them time to adapt. As the hours passed, something unexpected happened. The pain didn't vanish, but it became orderly. Betrayal turned into data, fear into timelines, emotion into something I could examine instead of drown in. 2 days later, Erin froze mid-typing. They're slipping, she said. She pointed to a charity update claiming I'd spent a week at Pacific Northwest Pediatric Center in March. My calendar showed I'd been presenting at a compliance seminar in Denver during those exact dates. They assume no one cross-checks, Erin said. That assumption will cost them. The test donation was my idea. I transferred $625 using an alias. The confirmation email arrived within minutes, warm, personal, grateful, thanking me for supporting Isabella's courage during rehabilitation. Attached was a photo that made my stomach churn. That's from my appendectomy, I whispered. 2 years ago. They accessed your phone, Erin said softly, probably during the holidays. The final confirmation came the next morning. They've scheduled a major fundraiser, Erin said. Goal, $32,000. Spinal surgery. Samuel leaned forward. That establishes ongoing intent. My phone rang. Mom. This time I answered. Charlotte, honey, Evelyn said warmly. We need to talk about a family announcement. My pulse pounded, but my voice didn't waver. Tell me about my child. Silence. Then a softer tone, carefully practiced. We were trying to protect you, with your career. Put Lauren on, I said. My sister's voice came on defensive and rushed. You never would have approved. We needed help. Avery's medical bills were... Avery isn't my child, I said evenly. You've been using my identity to commit fraud. They tried denial first, then justification, then fear. I gave them 24 hours to remove the page and return the donations. After the call ended, my hands were steady. That was legally sound, Samuel said quietly, and more generous than required. Erin's eyes flicked to her screen. And it won't stop them. She was right. That night, an email arrived from a donor asking why the page had disappeared, mentioning 2 other platforms I hadn't known about. Multiple fronts. I stared at the screen, understanding settling in fully for the first time. This wasn't a single lie, it was a system. And systems only collapse when every piece is exposed. By the next morning, the word system had taken on a weight I couldn't shake. It explained everything: why the lies felt polished instead of panicked, why the timing was always perfect, why guilt was deployed like a tool rather than an emotion. This wasn't a single bad decision spiraling out of control. It was an operation built slowly, carefully, on the assumption that I would never challenge it. Erin arrived early again, already scanning feeds on her phone. They didn't take everything down, she said as soon as she stepped inside. They shifted. She turned her laptop toward me. A second charity page, different name, same photos, same story, rewritten just enough to feel separate. A third appeared minutes later, hosted on another platform entirely. Multiple fronts, multiple narratives, one identity. They're diversifying risk, Erin said quietly, just like a business would. The thought made my stomach tighten. Samuel joined us on a video call, his tone calm but urgent. At this scale, we need federal involvement. This crosses state lines. It's wire fraud. The word federal echoed in my head longer than it should have. It should have scared me. Instead, it felt like the natural next step. Unavoidable. Overdue. By noon, Erin had transformed my living room into a monitoring hub. Screens glowed with timelines and donation trackers. Color-coded alerts flagged activity across platforms I'd never heard of before. Each ping represented someone else believing a story written with my name. They think taking one page down solved the problem, Erin said. That gives us leverage. 2 days later, I sat in a sterile conference room at the FBI Portland field office, hands folded tightly in my lap. Agent Thomas Reed listened without interrupting as Samuel laid out the evidence. Erin handed over a secure drive containing archived pages, IP traces, metadata, and authenticated screenshots. 237 donors identified so far, Erin said, across 8 platforms. Estimated total fraud, $214,980. Agent Reed exhaled slowly. That's significant. Identity theft, wire fraud, and likely unauthorized access to medical records. I slid my notarized affidavit across the table. I, Charlotte Grace, have never given birth to, nor adopted, any children. Such a simple sentence. It felt surreal seeing it framed as evidence. We'll proceed carefully, Reed said. Once we move, they'll know immediately. What do I tell people when this becomes public? I asked. The truth, he replied. Brief, controlled. Your identity was stolen. The matter is under investigation. I nodded, memorizing the phrasing like a script I might soon need to recite. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Lauren. Erin glanced at the screen before I could react. She posted a video. My chest tightened as the clip loaded. Lauren sat in soft lighting, eyes red, voice trembling just enough to feel real. We need help more than ever, she said directly to the camera. Isabella's mother, my sister, is experiencing a serious mental health crisis. She's denying her own child exists. My breath caught. The video cut to a document on hospital letterhead. My name at the top. A psychological evaluation diagnosing me with delusional disorder with paranoid features. They're escalating, I whispered. They're panicking, Samuel corrected. And that makes them reckless. Agent Reed's expression darkened. If those records are legitimate, this becomes far more serious. They are, I said quietly. My mother works in medical records compliance. Erin's fingers flew across her keyboard, donation counters moving fast. I watched the numbers climb: $2,300, $3,100, $4,900. Real people responding to a narrative where I was the villain. They're flipping the story, I said. If we wait, they'll destroy what's left of my credibility. Reed nodded once. We're expediting. The next morning, my phone rang before dawn. They withdrew $22,900 from one of the accounts, Reed said. Emergency clause. We couldn't block it in time. I sat down hard, my pulse pounding. But, he continued, that transfer proves direct access to fraudulently obtained funds. It strengthens the case. Before I could respond, Erin's laptop chimed again. Another fundraiser. Another video. This one was darker, urgent, framed as protection. Legal defense fund, Lauren pleaded, to keep Isabella safe from an unstable parent. A community group had already organized a candlelight gathering. I felt something inside me fracture. Not break, but split cleanly. They're weaponizing sympathy, Erin said softly. And fear, Samuel added, which means they're out of options. By nightfall, everything accelerated. Emergency injunctions were filed. Platforms froze accounts. Erin confirmed unauthorized access logs tied directly to my mother's work credentials. Federal prosecutors accepted the case. The apartment felt charged, like the air before a storm breaks. Funds frozen, Erin said suddenly. $54,600 secured. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my phone lit up again. Mom, I answered on speaker. Charlotte, Evelyn said, voice breaking with practiced precision. Please, you're destroying this family. It was destroyed when you stole my identity, I replied calmly. We're family, she whispered. Family protects family. That's exactly what I'm doing, I said. Protecting myself. I ended the call before she could respond. Agent Reed glanced at his phone. Media outlets received the evidence package. Warrants are being finalized. The raid was scheduled for the following morning. That night, after Erin and Samuel left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by proof of betrayal. An old photo album lay open on the table. Evelyn teaching me to ride a bike, Lauren and I building sandcastles. Erin returned quietly with takeout. Thought you shouldn't be alone tonight, she said. We ate in silence. Tomorrow, the lie would collapse, and there would be no way back. Morning arrived with a strange stillness, the kind that feels deliberate, like the world pausing to watch what you're about to do. I sat in the back seat of an unmarked sedan as it rolled through my mother's neighborhood in Beaverton. The streets were quiet, houses still dark, porch lights glowing softly against the early morning gray. This was the place I'd learned to ride a bike, memorized neighbors' names, believed safety was permanent. You don't have to be here, Agent Reed said gently from the front seat. We can wait at the field office. I need to see it, I replied. The words came without hesitation. I need to know it's real. At 6:13 a.m., everything moved at once. Agents approached from opposite sides of the house. A firm knock echoed through the quiet street. Then another. The front door opened and my mother, Evelyn, appeared in a floral bathrobe, confusion flickering briefly across her face before hardening into indignation as badges were revealed and rights were read. This is a mistake, she cried loudly, her voice carrying just far enough to stir curtains and wake neighbors. My daughter is sick. She doesn't understand what she's doing. Even now, she was writing the story. When the handcuffs closed around her wrists, something inside me finally loosened. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter, like pressure being released after years of holding my breath. Agent Reed's radio crackled. Second location secured. Suspect attempted to delete files across multiple devices. Lauren. I pressed my palms together, grounding myself as the truth settled fully into place. The technical architect of the scheme, caught mid-erasure. A news van pulled up before I had time to process the rest. Someone had tipped them off. A reporter stepped out, microphone raised, camera trained as my mother was guided toward a government vehicle. "Please," Evelyn sobbed theatrically, turning toward the camera. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was only trying to help my granddaughter. My poor Charlotte is having another episode." My jaw tightened. "She's skilled," Agent Reed murmured beside me. "She's been doing this a long time." "My whole life," I said quietly. Later that morning, I sat in a conference room at the FBI Portland field office, watching the initial hearing through a secure video feed. The evidence we'd assembled, weeks of careful documentation, unfolded with devastating clarity. Forged medical records, IP addresses traced to Lauren's devices, bank transfers mapped in clean, unforgiving lines. Lauren entered first, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. The moment she saw the evidence table stacked with files and screenshots, something in her broke. "It was Mom's idea," she blurted before her attorney could stop her. "I just handled the online parts. She said Charlotte would never know." The judge silenced her sharply. Then Evelyn entered. She looked nothing like the woman in the bathrobe, conservative dress, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. The grieving grandmother persona perfected down to the smallest detail. But when her eyes flicked toward the camera, toward me, the mask slipped for half a second. Anger. Then control. Bail was denied for both of them. Flight risk. Evidence tampering. The decision was swift. As guards moved them toward the exit, Evelyn turned toward the camera. She believed I was behind. "How could you do this to your own mother?" she cried, voice breaking perfectly on the final word. The response came out of me before I could second-guess it. "I've been asking myself the same question about you." For the first time in my life, the shame wasn't mine. Outside the courthouse, Pastor Jonathan Hale approached hesitantly. His usual confidence had softened into visible discomfort. "The community gathering," he said quietly. "We should have verified before taking sides. Many of us owe you an apology." I nodded, not because it fixed anything, but because I didn't want to carry their guilt too. Over the next few days, the public narrative shifted. Headlines changed from family dispute turns legal to sophisticated fraud ring exploits, community compassion. Evelyn was terminated after internal audits confirmed unauthorized access to medical records. Assets tied to the scheme were frozen. Lauren accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Her confession confirmed everything. How the lie began, how it escalated, how easy it became once no one questioned them. When the judge asked for my victim impact statement, I didn't talk about money. "They didn't just steal funds," I said calmly, my voice steady. "They stole trust. They weaponized family, something meant to protect, into a tool for exploitation." I spoke about Aaron staying up nights preserving evidence, about Samuel navigating the legal system beside me, about Agent Reed believing me when I could barely believe myself, and about the strangers who gave because kindness felt safer than suspicion. Evelyn stared at the table. Lauren cried quietly. Sentencing came quickly. Evelyn Grace received 5 years in federal prison. Lauren Grace received 3. Full restitution was ordered, $214,980, along with permanent restraining orders preventing any direct or indirect contact with me. As victims approached afterward, elderly couples, parents, community organizers, their gratitude felt heavy and humbling. "You gave us our faith back," one woman said softly. I shook my head. "You already had it. They just took advantage of it." That night, as I returned to my apartment, the quiet felt different. Not empty, just honest. The days after sentencing felt unreal, like the aftermath of a storm where the damage is already done, but the air hasn't quite settled. For weeks, my body had lived in constant readiness. I'd learned to sleep lightly, phone always within reach, bracing for the next escalation. Now the danger had passed, but my nervous system hadn't caught up yet. I woke before dawn each morning, heart racing, only to remember there was nothing left to fight. The first quiet morning unnerved me more than the chaos ever had. Erin noticed immediately. "You're still running," she said one afternoon as I reorganized the same stack of paperwork for the third time. "Even though there's nowhere left to run to." I stopped, my hands hovering over the folder. She was right. I'd spent so long being vigilant that stillness felt irresponsible. Rest felt like negligence. In the days that followed, my phone filled with messages, some expected, some not. Donors reached out first. People who had given money they couldn't afford to lose. Elderly couples who apologized to me for trusting my family. Parents who told me they'd redirected grocery money, believing they were helping a suffering child. Each conversation left me drained and strangely protective. "You weren't foolish," I found myself repeating. "You were kind, that matters." Saying it aloud helped me believe it too. Samuel guided me through restitution logistics with quiet efficiency. Funds were traced, frozen, redistributed. Every signature felt like reclaiming a piece of my name that had been misplaced, returned slowly, carefully, to where it belonged. Erin worked beside me, scrubbing search results, dismantling mirrored pages, filing identity restoration paperwork. Watching her work was oddly soothing. Each erased link felt like a stitch closing a wound. One evening, as we sat on my couch surrounded by empty takeout containers and discarded sticky notes, I asked the question that had been circling my thoughts. "What happens after?" I said. "When there's no crisis left to solve?" Erin didn't answer right away. She stared at the wall, thinking. "Then you get to decide who you are without it," she said finally. The idea unsettled me more than I expected. At work, my manager approved extended paid leave without hesitation. Therapy sessions were covered through our wellness program. The email ended with a single line that undid me completely. "Take the time you need." I cried harder over that sentence than I had in the courtroom. Family responses trickled in slowly. Some relatives reached out apologetically, admitting they'd believed the story without question. Others defended Evelyn even now, framing her actions as desperation rather than deception. A few stayed silent, choosing absence over accountability. I listened. I didn't argue. I learned quickly that understanding doesn't require agreement, and boundaries don't need to be justified. One evening, Erin and I sat on my balcony overlooking the Willamette River, city lights rippling across the water. The air was cool, grounding. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Turning them in?" I considered the question carefully, not the version that demanded a quick answer, but the honest one. "No," I said. "I regret how long I protected people who were harming others." She nodded, as if that was the only answer that ever made sense. Weeks later, Agent Reed called with an update I hadn't expected. "Your case is being used as a training reference," he said. "Family-based identity fraud, prevention protocols." I sat with that after the call ended, letting it settle. Personal devastation, repurposed into protection. I didn't know yet what my life would look like beyond this, but I knew what I didn't want anymore. I didn't want relationships built on fear. I didn't want love that demanded silence. I didn't want peace that required me to doubt myself. One night, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old family photo. Evelyn, Lauren, and me at a lakeside picnic years ago. We were smiling. Or maybe we were practiced at pretending. I studied it for a long moment, then slid it back into the drawer. Not with anger, not with longing. Some things don't need to be destroyed to be released. They just need to be set down. By the time my leave from work officially ended, I realized something quietly unsettling. I didn't miss the chaos. For years, I'd mistaken constant responsibility for stability. Being needed had felt like proof of worth. Now, without emergencies to solve or lies to untangle, I was forced to confront a version of myself that existed outside survival mode. Returning to the office felt strange, not because anyone treated me differently, but because I did. Colleagues were kind in careful ways. Conversations paused when I entered rooms, then resumed gently, as if everyone had silently agreed not to ask questions unless I invited them. My manager met with me privately, not to discuss performance but boundaries. "You don't owe anyone explanations," she said. "If you want space, take it." The word owe caught my attention. I'd built my entire adult life around that word without realizing it. My promotion came through 2 weeks later. No announcement, no spotlight. Just a quiet shift in responsibility and title that acknowledged something I hadn't yet named for myself. That I wasn't just compliant, I was capable. Erin noticed the change before I did. "You're not flinching anymore," she said one night as we cooked dinner together. "You used to brace before every new task." "I think I stopped expecting punishment," I replied after a moment. That realization stayed with me. I began volunteering at the Pacific Northwest Pediatric Center once a month, quietly, without telling anyone why. I read to kids during long treatment days, sat with parents who needed a break from vigilance. I never mentioned my story. It mattered that the help was real, that the need wasn't manufactured. One afternoon, a mother thanked me for coming back. "You don't have to," she said. "Most people disappear after the first visit." "I know," I replied. "That's why I don't." Around the same time, Samuel invited me to join a small working group focused on financial integrity education. Banks, community organizations, a few federal liaisons. It wasn't a formal initiative yet, just conversations. At first, I listened more than I spoke. But as meetings went on, patterns emerged, stories that echoed my own. Adult children manipulated by parents, siblings weaponizing loyalty, entire families built on unspoken rules that punished questions. "This isn't rare," I said finally during one meeting. "It's just rarely named." That was how the Identity Integrity Project began, not as a public campaign, but as a shared recognition that family-based fraud thrived in silence. I helped draft materials in the evenings, translating lived experience into practical guidance, red flags, verification steps, language that allowed people to question without feeling cruel. It felt different from everything else I'd done. Not reactive, preventive. The first workshop was small. No cameras, no press. Just a room of professionals who wanted to understand how trust becomes a vulnerability. Family fraud succeeds, I told them, not because people are naive, but because they're trained to endure discomfort quietly. Afterward, a woman approached me, eyes glassy. "My sister's been asking for money for years," she said. "I don't know if it's fraud, but it feels wrong." "That feeling matters," I told her. "You're allowed to listen to it." That night, back at my apartment, I stood at the window watching reflections ripple across the Willamette River. The city lights fractured and reformed endlessly, never quite settling into a single shape. I thought about how often I'd ignored that same feeling in myself, confusing peace with compliance, love with obligation. My phone buzzed. A letter notification. I didn't open it immediately. I recognized the sender. Evelyn. I set the phone down and made tea instead. Let the kettle boil. Let the steam rise. When I finally read the message, it was careful, restrained. She wrote about regret, about fear, about not knowing how things had gone so far. She didn't ask directly to be forgiven. She never did. That had always been her skill, leaving space for me to fill in responsibility. I typed my response slowly. "Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I wish you healing. But our relationship requires boundaries." I didn't soften it. I didn't explain. When I pressed send, there was no rush of relief, just a sense of finality. Later that week, I met my cousin Rachel for coffee. We hadn't spoken since everything became public. She looked smaller than I remembered, hands wrapped tightly around her cup. "I should have seen it," she said quietly. "All those photos, all those stories. I never questioned them." "I didn't either," I replied. "For a long time." She nodded, eyes shining. "I'm sorry." I accepted the apology, not because it fixed the past, but because it didn't try to rewrite it. As winter edged closer, something inside me finally loosened. I slept through the night. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could absorb without breaking. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I was choosing what came next. The invitation arrived quietly, tucked between routine emails and calendar reminders. National Financial Integrity Summit, keynote session. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. 6 months earlier, I could barely say my own name without feeling like it had been taken from me and misused. Now someone was asking me to stand in front of 200 professionals and explain exactly how that theft had happened, not in theory, but in practice. Inside a family, inside a home. I almost declined. Not because I didn't think I could speak, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to be seen that clearly. Erin noticed my hesitation immediately. "You don't have to do this," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter as I reread the email for the fourth time. "Your life doesn't have to become a lesson." "I know," I said, "but I also know how many people are still living inside this without language for it." That was the part I couldn't ignore. I remembered the early days, how disoriented I'd felt, how easily I'd doubted myself instead of the lie. If someone had described my situation back then, clearly and without judgment, it might have saved me months of confusion and guilt. So I accepted. The morning of the summit, I stood backstage listening to the low hum of voices bleeding through the curtain. 200 people in tailored jackets and muted dresses, compliance officers, investigators, analysts, people who understood risk models and probability curves, people who didn't always understand how deeply emotion could override logic. My name was announced. I walked onto the stage without rushing, without bracing for impact. The lights were warm, not harsh. The room quieted gradually, not abruptly. "Hello," I said. "My name is Charlotte Grace." I paused, not for effect, but because the moment mattered. My family used my identity to commit a multi-year fraud. The stillness that followed was complete. I didn't dramatize what came next. I didn't soften it either. I spoke about structure, about how trust creates blind spots, how emotional proximity replaces verification, how urgency is used to shut down questions. I wasn't chosen at random, I told them. I was chosen because I was predictable, responsible, trained to prioritize harmony over truth. I explained how the story escalated slowly, how early lies were small and plausible, how repetition created credibility, how guilt was introduced only after trust was fully established. And the hardest part, I said, my voice steady, wasn't losing money. It was realizing that the people who taught me what family meant were also the ones who taught me to doubt my instincts. I watched faces change as that sentence landed. Pens stopped moving. People leaned forward without realizing they'd done it. I talked about warning signs I'd ignored. The phrasing that always framed emergencies as temporary, just this once, just until things stabilize. The absence of documentation that I accepted because asking for proof felt unkind. Family fraud succeeds, I said, because we confuse loyalty with love, obligation with connection, silence with peace. The applause at the end wasn't explosive. It was sustained, thoughtful. Afterward, people approached me in small clusters. Some thanked me professionally. Others spoke quietly, almost apologetically, as if confessing something they hadn't said out loud before. A woman from a regional bank admitted they'd never considered internal identity misuse as a primary risk factor. A man from a nonprofit said they were revising donor verification protocols that same week. One person didn't speak at all, just pressed a hand to their chest and nodded. Back in my hotel room that night, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle. For the first time since everything began, the story didn't feel like it was still happening to me. It felt like something I had already lived through. Life after the summit didn't shift dramatically. There was no sudden clarity, no cinematic turning point. Just small changes. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped apologizing before setting boundaries. I stopped assuming discomfort meant I was doing something wrong. The Identity Integrity Project grew slowly, intentionally. No press releases, no urgency. Just workshops, consultations, and conversations that gave people permission to question without shame. One evening, as I reviewed materials for an upcoming session, Erin watched me from the doorway. "You're not doing this to make sense of what happened anymore," she said. I looked up, surprised. "No," I realized. "I'm doing it so it doesn't happen again." That distinction mattered. The email from Margaret Lawson arrived on the 1-year anniversary of Natalie's message, the text that had cracked my life open. Her father had been systematically defrauded by a relative using tactics eerily similar to my mother's. She wrote with hesitation, unsure how much to say, how much to ask. We met at a quiet cafe the following weekend. Margaret twisted her napkin as she spoke, voice trembling in a way that felt painfully familiar. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "The evidence is overwhelming, but he's family." I didn't rush to answer. "Then we don't start with confrontation," I said. "We start with protection, documentation, boundaries. You don't owe clarity to anyone who benefits from your confusion." She exhaled slowly, like someone setting down a heavy weight. As we talked, I became acutely aware of how different this moment felt from a year earlier. I wasn't scrambling for footing. I wasn't questioning my right to speak. I was steady. Walking home afterward, I thought about how often I'd measured my life by what I could endure. Pain tolerated, discomfort absorbed, silence maintained. Now, I measured it differently, by what I could offer without disappearing. That night, I stood at my window, watching the city lights scatter across the Willamette River. The reflections fractured and reformed endlessly, never quite settling into a single shape. I thought about my mother's letter, about my response, about how finality didn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it felt quiet, almost anticlimactic. But it was real. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I wasn't preparing for retaliation. I wasn't rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I was living forward. For the first time in my adult life, the absence of crisis didn't feel like a void. It felt like space. The newspaper stayed on my kitchen counter for most of the morning, folded neatly beside a cooling cup of coffee. Sunlight poured through the windows of my apartment, catching on dust motes in the air, warming the wood floor beneath my bare feet. Nothing about the room felt dramatic. Nothing felt urgent. And for the first time in a very long time, that didn't make me uneasy. When I finally unfolded the paper, my face looked back at me from the local section. Not triumphant, not devastated, just present. The headline was restrained, almost understated, considering everything it represented. "Daughter exposes family fraud ring." Erin leaned against the counter, reading over my shoulder. "They handled it well," she said. "They didn't turn it into spectacle." "That matters," I replied. And it did. For so long, my life had been defined by extremes: urgency, fear, loyalty tested until it broke. Seeing the truth laid out plainly without embellishment felt like a final act of respect. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Agent Thomas Reed. "Just confirming," he said, his voice steady and professional. "Evelyn and Lauren were transferred to their respective facilities yesterday. Different states, different security levels." I thanked him, ended the call, and sat quietly for a moment afterward. Erin watched me carefully. "How does that feel?" I searched for the honest answer instead of the expected one. "For the first time in months," I said slowly, "I slept through the night." Relief didn't arrive all at once. It didn't sweep in dramatically or announce itself. It came in fragments, waking without dread, leaving my phone in another room, realizing I hadn't rehearsed a difficult conversation in days. My employer followed through on every promise. Additional paid leave. Therapy sessions covered without question. No pressure to return early. No subtle expectation that I explain myself. One email ended with the same sentence that had undone me before. "Take the time you need." Family reactions arrived in waves. Some relatives reached out quietly, apologizing for believing the story without question. Others defended Evelyn even now, framing her actions as desperation, as maternal instinct gone too far. A few chose silence, absence serving as their final position. I let each response stand as it was. I no longer felt responsible for correcting everyone's version of events. That, too, was new. One evening, Samuel stopped by with the final confirmation paperwork. Fraudulent medical records purged, digital remnants scrubbed, my identity fully restored. "This won't follow you," he said. "Anywhere." That night, I placed the small plaque Agent Reed had given me on a bookshelf. Not as a trophy, not as proof of victory, but as a marker, something to remind me that courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like documentation. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it looks like refusing to stay silent any longer. The Identity Integrity Project grew quietly over the next few months. No press releases, no grand launch, just workshops, bank consultations, community meetings, spaces where people were given permission to question without being labeled unkind or disloyal. At one session, a woman approached me afterward, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother's been asking for money for years," she said. "I don't know if it's fraud, but something feels wrong." I met her eyes. "That feeling matters," I said. "You're allowed to listen to it." Walking home that evening, I realized how different that moment felt compared to a year ago. Back then, I would have second-guessed myself, wondered if I was projecting, feared being unfair. Now clarity came without apology. 6 months after the summit, I received an email from Margaret Lawson, the woman I'd met at the cafe. Her father's case had been resolved. Early intervention had stopped further losses. "You helped us before things got worse," she wrote. "I don't know how to thank you." I read the message twice, then closed my laptop and stared out the window. I hadn't saved anyone. I'd simply refused to look away, and shown someone else how to do the same. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a single old family photograph. Evelyn, Lauren, me, a lakeside picnic from years ago. We were smiling, arms loosely around one another, the image of closeness. I studied it carefully. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel longing, just understanding. I returned the photo to the drawer and closed it gently. Some chapters don't end with forgiveness or reconciliation. Some end with clarity, and the decision to move forward without rewriting the past to make it bearable. Family, I'd learned, isn't defined by blood or history alone. It's defined by honesty, by respect, by the willingness to tell the truth, even when it costs you the version of love you were taught to accept. For years, I'd believed strength meant enduring quietly, absorbing discomfort, keeping peace at my own expense. Now I understood something different. Strength is choosing yourself without cruelty. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. And silence, when it enables harm, is not kindness. One evening, standing by my window as the city lights reflected across the Willamette River, I realized something else too. My life wasn't defined by what had been taken from me. It was defined by what I refused to lose. My name, my integrity, my ability to trust my own instincts. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels off, if a story doesn't quite add up, if guilt has replaced clarity, if love feels like obligation instead of choice, please hear this. You're not wrong for questioning. You're not cruel for wanting proof, and you're not disloyal for protecting yourself. Truth doesn't destroy families, lies do. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is step out of a role you were never meant to play. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you believe quiet strength matters more than loud revenge. And I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my place? Your voice matters more than you think.